Please be advised, the episode you are about to listen to deals with some potentially triggering topics for some, including depression, drug use, addiction, and suicide. If you or someone you love is dealing with any of these issues, please reach out and ask for help. The National Suicide and Crisis Prevention Hotline can be reached by calling 1-800-985-5990 or texting 988 to 988.
Hi, and welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. There are times when we are required to delve deep into the uncharted territories of life. They are moments when we are confronted with the stark and often heart-wrenching realities that we would rather avoid. In a world where we often hope for narratives bathed in light, there are no guarantees that we'll emerge unscathed from the shadows. And though these dark times are part of the human experience, we're reminded of this truth that sometimes in life we must confront the uncomfortable, the painful, and the challenging. These are the moments that test our resilience and sometimes prove that we're not only stronger than we realize, most of the time we realize we're stronger than we ever wanted to be. In today's episode, we have the privilege of engaging in a conversation with a remarkable guest who has faced life's heart-wrenching realities head-on. Her story is a testament to the courage it takes to confront the unseen, to navigate a storm when she'd rather seek shelter, and to find hope in the midst of adversity. Randi Lee Bowlaugh is an author whose story is not just about her personal struggles, but also a testament to the strength of the human spirit when faced with the relentless grip of addiction. It's a story of love, of an emotional tightrope of setting boundaries, and ultimately a story of finding hope amidst the darkest of circumstances. So Randi Lee... I just got braces and they're driving me bonkers. I can't talk.
It just sounded like my sister. My sister calls Randi Lee all the time.
It's a cute name. So Randi Lee, welcome to the show and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into the heavy stuff, because I will just say that today is probably going to be a little heavier than what I normally cover on this show, but I think it is one that is so important and so just moving and encouraging. Before we get into that, just tell us a little bit about you.
So the fun stuff about me, I have 4 cats and 3 dogs. I've got 2 kids. I've got a grandson, a husband. I used to do kickboxing. I've been doing horse riding lately. I love swimming and nature, camping, all that fun stuff. Yeah, so that's fun side of things. I know we're going to dive into the hard stuff, so I figured I'd keep it light and fun.
I love it. Now, I'm just going to throw this out there that you're talking about having a grandkid, and I'm going, you don't look old enough to have a grandkid. So just
not.
Oh my gosh! Well, I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm like, you look amazing. Like you don't look like a grandma.
Thank you. Yeah. No. As my husband likes to say, it takes generational mess ups to achieve what we have achieved with grandkid status right now. But it's okay because I love him.
Hey, that's all that matters. And as long as that baby knows that baby is loved, then they'll be just fine.
Very much so.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so like I said, today is deep and heavy, but your story is so inspirational, and I think it's one that a lot of people unfortunately have faced, and they've gone through it, and they haven't found on the other side that light, that hope, that and just working through it. Now, I'm not saying that it was an easy journey, because it's not. I know for a fact, I've watched it in my own family, that this is not an easy journey to set about. But what you've done and how you've taken it and turned it into a message of encouragement, love it. So share a little bit about your personal journey and what led you to write a book about your experiences.
Okay, so yeah, there's so much to unpack. And there's actually a few books about it because there is so much to unpack. But I'll try to keep it to a short version. So, childhood was fairly good, but then as a teenager, I started feeling really awful about myself and hating myself, considered running away, considered hurting myself. At the time, I just thought everybody feels the same way. This is just being a teenager. At the same time, still seriously considering doing the things that I was thinking about. at that time, so my mom and dad, I have never remembered them actually being together. They were always separated my whole life. I'd go to my dad's every other weekend as a kid. My brother and I had different dads, same mom. My brother used to come with me to my dad's until he was about 13 or so. He was 4 years older than me. And I was like, dude, come back with me. Why are you not coming? I eventually realized my dad's a giant jerk and really only cares about himself. And then when I was 10, my first sister was born. She is, I was 10, so a decade younger than me. We have the same dad, different moms. And then I had another sister born when I was 12. Absolutely adore my sisters. They're great. But that large gap was very different, especially where we weren't growing up in the same house either. Very different. Like I said, when I became a teenager, my brother at that time, he was in and out of juvie. So that's prison for kids, prison for youth. Mm-hmm. So he was in and out of juvie. He was doing drugs. My mom was very, very much trying to keep me in this bubble, but there would be days that my brother would come home and just be covered in blood because he got in a fight. And so it was really, I have to give my mom credit now that I'm an adult and a mom. I totally understand what she was trying to, like, what she was struggling with trying to help my brother, but then shield me and help me as a kid. So, but as a teenager, I hated my mom. Like, I was so mad at my mom, and I've always been a mama's girl. So mad at my mom for focusing so much attention on Brandon and like forgetting about me. When I was in grade 8, she got married. He turned out to be a complete jerk. He was an alcoholic. And so when he wasn't drinking, he was nice, as most are, right? And then when he was drinking, just absolutely awful, yelling, screaming, throwing stuff. I would hide in my room. I would never invite friends over. Like in high school, I always went to their house. I never wanted people to come over. At that time in grade 9, my brother was in jail. He was finally in adult jail because he was 18. When he came out, my mom tried to just rent him his own place. My mom didn't want him to come live with us because she knew that was bad news bears. My stepdad at the time, oh no, of course you can come live here, trying to be all like, did not work out well. So that is when really the yelling, the screaming, all of that escalated to a super extreme. So again, I'm just going to high school, hating every minute of high school. I skipped most days, always passed. My mom had 2 rules if I was going to skip, because my brother always skipped, but she never knew where he was. So she knew that she couldn't stop me from skipping. So she said, don't fail anything. And you have to stay home then. You're not allowed to just go out. Yeah, nice. I can do that, right? At least I don't have to go to high school.
That's right.
Right. So I really appreciate that. And so throughout all that time, I'm feeling like this left out kid. I don't know what's going on. When I was 17, I finally had enough. I moved into my friend's house with her parents, like her family. It was good in the sense that I was out of the craziness that was my house, but it wasn't home. So there was this whole other feeling of not belonging, and just I felt like all through being a teenager is almost in like this survival robot mode, I guess is the best way to put it. So then I graduated from high school. My brother is still in and out of jail. He's doing drugs. He's having children. I love my nephew, my nieces, but still, he's having these random children. And finally, my mom left. Like, her and her husband broke up. Finally, I moved back home, but it was weird then going back home. I moved in with a friend, a coworker. Craziness. I ended up getting pregnant. Had my kid, and then when my kid was about 6 months old, I met who is now my husband. We've been together 16 years. So that's a good thing. But when Love was about 6 months old, we started dating. I had known him for a few years before that, but we actually started dating and he was going to college. He's like, hey, why don't you apply? You can come. I'll drive you. So, okay, fine. So I applied. I went to college. College was awesome. Absolutely loved it. That is where I finally learned that I was depressed. I had a name for what I was feeling all of those years. It seems like a silly thing to celebrate, but it was amazing to finally have a word to put to it. Yeah, like, so I finally was able to put words to it. So college wasn't bad. I finally was on my, like, living in my own apartment, so that was really good. Well, kind of skipped a part. So when my kid was first born, I moved back in with my mom for help. She was with this other guy. It turns out that he was a drug addict that he completely hid, and then ended up cheating on my mom. Super crazy abusive. The horror stories my mom tells. I mean, that's her story to tell, but wow, did I not know. So yeah, so then I did move out. I had my own apartment, a nice 2-bedroom place. So that was good through college. And then just, it was always this feeling, a depression comes and goes. And eventually it got to a point that I had a serious plan what I was going to do. I was going to drive off a bridge. I had to drive on like 3 bridges to get myself to work every day and home again. So not good. And so I ended up finally seeking help and talking to the doctor, going to therapy, all that stuff. I'm sure you'll have more questions. So my Cliff Notes version. Can you believe that? I'm still rambling. Cliff Notes version.
You're not rambling. This is good. It's background.
Yes, all the background. When my kid was 8, he finally got diagnosed with autism. So we went through years of massive struggle with him, trying to figure out what was going on, fighting with the school board. So of course, I was feeling like a horrible mother, a horrible co-worker, horrible wife. I couldn't keep it together. I should just, be gone again. But so we finally got his diagnosis when he was 8, slowly starting to get support. But the school system is not set up to deal with kids, with many different kinds of kids, but I can only talk from my experience. So kids like Lev. We homeschooled for a bit. We did schoolwork at home through the school, and tons of different ways we've tried to keep him going and keep him learning things, back and forth to different therapies. He actually has attempted suicide, so back and forth to the hospital multiple times for multiple attempts. The doctors would say, well, make the house safe. Okay, well, sharp knives are already put in a safe. Pills are already put in a safe. I can't put cords to the TV in a safe. The one time he's tying a cord around his neck. There's certain things that you just can't do. So obviously that was a huge struggle. My brother, he was telling me, I want to get clean. So I tried to help him throughout the time. And then of course, having to set boundaries, my brother would always say, hey, I want to come over. I was like, no, I don't even want you to know where I live right now. So long as you are doing drugs, you are not welcome. 2 years ago, my brother died from a drug overdose. That was, we can dig into that if you want. So that was a whole thing. I guess in 6 years ago, I had cancer. So while my kid is going in and out the hospital, I'm having to deal with cancer. Eventually Lev got into a treatment facility. He lived there for 3 months. That was tons of help. What else? Oh, so before I got married, I'm going back because I forgot things. But when we were engaged, so we've been married now 11 years. When we were engaged, my husband almost died. He got diagnosed with diabetes in the hospital. So now he has an insulin pump, so that's good. But the doctor was like, you should have been in a diabetic coma. So now every time his blood sugar's messed up, I'm like, are you okay? And it's very messed up all the time. So yeah, there is my Cliff Notes version. Feel free to dig in.
I don't know where to start. Where do you want to start? No. So you took all of this and you put it into words and you put it on the page, and while you seem to have really dealt with everything very maturely. A lot of people would get to that point in their story and they'd be like, and then I was done, and it's everybody else's fault, and this, that, and the other. And so when I'm hearing you talk, I'm thinking, she has really taken the time to process, her emotions and her feelings towards this, because you don't come across as bitter, you don't come across as angry. And, granted, we don't know each other. And so I don't know, maybe this is different. I don't know. When you put things into writing and through your writing process, for me, I know that's a therapeutic action. Did that also, I know you said you had sought therapy as well, but was writing part of your therapy?
So writing was the very first thing I did. So as a teenager, before I even had the words to know what I was doing, I was writing about it. So that's actually, I would say that's what saved me, was writing about it, because I wrote, and my very first book is all of the poetry I wrote as a teenager. And it is very dark, and it is about hurting myself. But by writing about it, I never actually did it. So writing was definitely my very first go-to, and that's why when things happen in life, I'm like, oh, here's a new book.
Yes, and that's one thing that through my marriage and family counseling years, when I was doing that and seeing clients, journaling is one of those things that I'm like, if you can put it on the page and then you can read it back to yourself, you will see so much of what is being hidden, like what your little shadow self is hiding from yourself, so putting it in writing and seeing it on the page, it is literally a different part of your brain processing things. And so, and for me, when I write fiction, and so when I'm writing fiction, I'm processing emotions and getting new perspectives on things just through processing my character's emotions, which is wild. I never really thought of that, because I have always been a journaler and a diary writer and that kind of thing. But when you start putting faces with emotions, you're like, ooh, that could actually be something that I'm dealing with. And then you see a whole different light on, oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think people who write fiction, I've written a little bit of fiction, but even when I'm reading it, I'm like, I wonder what you're going through in your life, because no matter what we're writing, whether we're making it up or we're not, there's always a little piece of that author in there, because you always write from a perspective of things that you know. Even if you're making up a world, there's something that you learned along the way.
Oh, absolutely. I always think about it like we're like big Harry Potter nerds around here. I don't know if that's, if everybody
Not
is,
me, but my kid, my husband, love it. So I've seen them all a bajillion times.
Okay, so in one of the books, you have Dolores Umbridge, who, she's punishing Harry and making him write these sentences, I will not tell lies. And it's a quill that he's like, there's no ink. And she's like, oh, don't worry about that. And it's the ink comes from his blood. And he is literally writing the ink is his blood through the quill onto the page. And that's what it is when you're an author, right? Like that is part of you leaving your body and going onto those pages. And so, yes, there is always a little bit, even if the author says, no, I didn't base it on anything. I'm like, yeah, you did. The thought came from you.
Right, exactly. And actually, as you're saying that, we're talking about, journaling and all that fun stuff. So much of my first drafts of certain books, they are filled with, and you said anger, they are filled with anger. They are filled with disappointment. And then I have to go back and be like, okay, now that I've processed what's going on, now I need to actually write it in a way to help other people. And there was definitely a ton of years that I held on to a lot of anger. Like I said, I've always been a mama's girl, but from all the trauma and stuff that happened as a teenager, I held that against her for years. Even as an adult, as much as I still loved my mom, and she even moved in with us for a while, I was still so angry with her. I could not, for the life of me, wrap my brain around how did you choose? This is how I was thinking. How did you choose to babysit your alcoholic husband instead of helping your teenage daughter? So it wasn't actually until earlier this year, end of last year, that I was talking to my therapist about this topic specifically. And we actually worked through like a PTSD workbook in therapy. And yeah, it's all about writing it down. She's like, don't just think about these questions. I want to see these worksheets filled out. I'm like, oh, because it's way harder to write it on the page and then read it, because there is so much there. And every time I'd go to therapy, she'd go, well, thank you for being so honest. I'm like, well, I'm paying you like $200 an hour. I better be honest or I'm wasting my money. But not everyone is, right? So it wasn't until this year that I actually, from my therapist helping me to go, okay, well, let's look at what your mom was doing. Was your mom maybe using what she had at her disposal to shield you from what was happening? And I was like, oh, maybe that's what she was doing. She wasn't choosing to ignore me. She was choosing to shield me. And changing the way that I was thinking about the situations. And then also we did a whole bunch on, putting emotion words to it, because my favorite thing to go is I'm fine. She goes, fine's not an emotion. Damn it.
Right.
Yeah. So everybody who's like me and says we're fine, well, fine's not an emotion. Sorry to burst your bubble. And she actually had to give me, and I went to school for psychology too. Like obviously not to the level of her, but I went for lots of different courses. And so she actually had to give me it was a circle chart of different emotions. So the line of happy, but there's pleasant and joyful and then ecstatic, right? Like the levels of these emotions and when I'm filling out these sheets she gave me, I referred back to that chart so many times because I didn't have these specific words to define, what level of sadness or anger, guilt, what level I was on. So I actually referred back to that so many times. That really helped because, again, it was defining what you're feeling, which I think a lot of us take for granted, but it is so much harder than it sounds. And then the other really big worksheet there was a bunch, but the other one that always sticks with me is we did this responsibility one. And so there was three levels, and it's like, well, level 1, yeah, okay, there might be some responsibility, but you didn't mean to. It was a complete accident, even though, oh, you spilled your milk because you knocked it over. Well, yeah, I'm responsible, but total accident to me too. And then the second level is kind of meant to, but didn't really mean for it to, make a huge mess or wreck the carpet or something. But the third level was I knew what I was doing when I knocked that milk over. I wanted to ruin your carpet. It was my intention. I wanted that. And so when we're working through that sheet, I'm like, oh, yeah, no. And because a lot of times, too, we internalize all that bad stuff, right? And I was like, it's my fault that this bad thing happened. It's my fault that I am being yelled at. Well, when I look at this responsibility chart, nowhere does that responsibility fall on me, actually. And so when my therapist is doing this with me, and then we're referring back to the other chart and different things we're doing, I'm like, oh. So that therapy earlier this year probably is why I now seem like I don't hold anger or all that stuff, because I did a lot of work on it.
And that's fantastic. And I wish more people would admit the fact that, I don't know how to put words to my emotions. I don't know how to put words to my feelings. And I think a lot of that stems from, especially the generation of my parents and the one, their parents. You stuffed those emotions. It was, I'll give you a reason to cry, or, you suck it up, buttercup. There was this mentality of, and they wanted to make you tougher. They wanted to make you stronger. They wanted to make you independent. The problem is we are given these emotions at birth. And if we're not taught how to address them and deal with them and just identify them in general, that's a struggle, that can turn into a long-term struggle. And I think that is a lot of where our mental health and mental wellness, they suffer because we stuff it. You shove it in a box and you say, that is not something that needs to be brought to light. That's personal. It's taboo. We don't mess with that.
Yeah. And I think, there is a time and place for stuffing things in a box to then open up later, right? Yeah. If I am at work, especially, so I was in social work for about 6 years, and people would come in and see stuff, and it would be a little bit triggering because I hadn't worked through anything. And that was not the time and place to talk about it. So yeah, I'm going to put in this box, I'm going to compartmentalize and deal with it later. Although later for me was years, but don't wait years, but really, there is times and places. I don't want to have a complete meltdown or breakdown at a grocery store, right? If I get some bad news or something. However, I can feel those emotions later when I get home. It's not to say that I should ever deal with them. And I think that was the big thing is back then, put your big girl panties on. That was the one that I used to hear. Or my mom's favorite line, fake it till you make it. You can't. You cannot just put on a happy face and then eventually be happy. No, you'll put on a happy face.
Yeah.
And hate yourself every minute of every day until there's no more days left.
That is so true. And fake it till you make it has a place, because sometimes you are in these situations where you're like, I really don't want to be here, but we're just gonna fake it till we make it. But long term, it does not work at all.
Yeah, when I'm at work and I'm dealing with a customer who's complaining at me, yep, okay, thanks. As soon as I hang up the phone, and it's so funny because all of us at work, we do this. We hang up the phone. Oh my goodness. Yeah, right. I am not dealing with that one again.
Yeah, if their number comes up, that's yours. You hand it off. You're like,
right?
Yes. I was thinking, it kept playing in my head, and I was like, there's this acronym for fine. We say that I'm fine. And this acronym kept popping into my head. It's like feelings inside, not expressed. Like that's what fine stands for, right? It's like you've
never before.
But it's true. It's so true. Like, I'm fine. No, you're really not. Your face tells me otherwise. Your body language tells me otherwise. Your, behaviors down the road tell me otherwise. And so when we start shoving it into that box and we start hiding it and burying it, we're like, I'm fine. And eventually fine becomes not so fine.
Exactly. I first started going to therapy. This is years back now. And people would be like, oh, hey, how are you today? Because at least where I live, hey and how are you always go together. And so I started saying to people, do you want the answer? Yeah. Because there's going to be an answer probably that you're not going to like, because most times you're saying it simply as a greeting. You're not actually asking the question. So I would start saying, do you want to know the answer? And so if it's my coworkers that know me, most of them be like, yeah, hey, what's up? Like, what's going on? But even at, say, a grocery store cashier, oh, how are you today? And so I even started saying to them, do you want to know? They're like, I hope you're having a good day. Like, they stop in their tracks going, I know I asked the question, but it's just this automatic thing. So I've started to consciously only ask people, how are you, if I actually want to know the answer.
Yes, and I think being conscious of our words and being, how we approach people and that kind of thing is so important, because I'm in South Alabama, well, Central Alabama. I live in the South, and I'm in Central Alabama, where, how's your mom and them? Like, do you really want to know? Because it is an automatic question, like, hey, how are you? And it's like, I'm good, I'm fine, all is well. And I'm like, and if I say I'm fine, I might be lying to them on top of it. They don't want to hear it, and I'm already lying. So that's a whole nother.
Yeah. And then like for me anyways, I'd say that and I'm like, oh, I know I'm lying. And now I'm a big fat liar.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's 3 steps back, and you're 3 steps back in therapy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I started going, do you want to know? And trying to watch when I ask that question, because from going through my therapy, I don't want to go backward. I want to go forward.
Yes. And honestly, when I ask the question, if you want to stop and tell me, I would love to listen. I am a listener. I am a people watcher. I am an observer by nature. Like, I do actually want you to tell me how you are, but very few people will actually be like, do you know, I am stressed to the max, like I can't do this today or whatever. And so, because we have gotten to the point where we feel that question is just in passing, it's just a courtesy question that I really don't care, but I really do.
Exactly. So for everybody who's listening, if you're going to ask the question, be prepared for an answer. And if you get asked the question, have a real answer.
That's right. Just be honest. And you'll also find, maybe I'll go too deep too fast.
Well,
honestly, they're not your therapist, but you'll also learn if they're going to stick around to listen next time, or they won't ask again.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not saying that you have to go deep like I just did when I was, giving it all, but you can say, not having a great day. You can leave at that. You don't have to say you're fine when you're not.
That's right. And if they ask follow-up questions and you feel comfortable telling them, by all means, but yes, quit asking it as a courtesy if you don't really mean it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good lesson. Very good lesson.
A hard lesson too.
True story. And that kind of makes me think of one of my favorite topics in psychology, and I think it's because it hits close to home for me, is boundaries. And you kind of mentioned this earlier about setting boundaries and having to have those boundaries. And it's something you write about in your book, in one of your books. I don't know about all of them. I picked up Goodbye Too Soon. I started reading that.
In that book. Huge.
Yes, exactly. And I'm like, boundaries matter. And it's really, really, really hard to set boundaries with family specifically. It's different when it's a stranger asking, how are you? And saying, do you really want to know? That's a boundary setting. You're setting your boundary saying, we're about to cross a line here. If you don't want to know, then you need to back up. And, but with family, it can get really complicated. So let's talk about setting boundaries in your family and how that looks and how that works.
Yeah. So that was, really hard to learn how to do, especially growing up. It didn't seem like there was boundaries between family members. It was boundaries from family to outside, right? Like you don't share what happens in this house outside of this house. Whereas when you're in the house, sure, go ahead, throw stuff, call people names, drop the F-bomb at each other. Big deal. But then as I started getting older, and especially when I had my kid, I didn't want him around that. I was like, that felt awful to me. Why would I want my kid around that? And so I started having to say, no, I'm not going to see you. And I started telling my brother, no, you're not coming over. Now I wish that I had gone through the therapy I just went through this year before he had died, because I think the boundaries would have still been there, but the way I expressed it to him would have been different, because at the time I was still scared of what his backlash would be, because every time he didn't get his way, it would be a whole bunch of yelling. He would be calling me names, I am a B, I'm a whatever. And, when you're already a depressed person, that is pretty hard, especially coming from somebody who goes, oh, but I miss my sister and I love you, and, trying to make you feel good. Then all of a sudden it's this, you're a horrible, awful person. So it's really hard to compute in your brain. So I used to say to him, I didn't talk to him for years, actually. He was not invited to my wedding when we got married. Whenever I saw him, it was only maybe at family functions at my aunt's house or something like that. I've had very little contact with him for years because I couldn't do it. And then during COVID, I had 2 conversations with him. So he was at my aunt's house. I was on Zoom with my aunt, and he had stopped by. So I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll talk to him. So we would talk a little bit, and it's really hard to have a conversation with somebody who, 1, you haven't talked to in ages, and 2, who really had nothing going on in their life. So my brother's life pretty much revolves around, when can I get my next hit? He no longer had a job. Unfortunately his girlfriend had died. So that was really, really hard for him. I know she actually had died in his arms. It was like a heart issue or something. But so it was hard to be like, hey, yeah, so I'm doing great. I have this house and I have my kids and I got a job and I got, I felt bad for all the things I had that he didn't have. But again, that's not my fault, and it's not a bad thing that I have what I have. But at the time I felt really bad saying I didn't know how to have a conversation with him. And then he would say, at this time it was close to Christmas, he was like, hey, I want to get together for Christmas. I want the family together. My brother always loved having family. And so I know it was really hard for him when most of us went, I can't. I just can't. And instead of saying what I wanted to say was no, because you're still doing drugs. Instead, because I was scared of his reaction. I was scared of setting him off at my aunt's house and leaving her to deal with the outcome, that I didn't know if he was going to break something, if he was going to whatever. I don't think he would ever hurt her physically, but break her computer, punch a hole in her wall. Like I had seen all of these things done. And so I didn't want to put her in that position. So instead I said, well, it's COVID, we can't. And so I hid behind that. Now knowing myself a little better and things like that, I think I would have said it differently. I wouldn't have been as scared and hide behind that. And then a few months later, so he died May 20th, which is why I released the book that day. So he died on May 20th. So it's maybe 2 weeks before that. Again, he was at my aunt's house. The COVID restrictions were much more lax by that time. And I'm talking to him, and again, he's saying, well, I want to get together. I want to see everybody. And again, I had that fear. And it's not like just a scared. It's like, at the time, it was like this whole inner body scaredness. Like I just went back to being that little girl hiding in my bedroom, listening to the fighting, and it panics me, right? And so it's more than just, oh, I didn't want to leave his anger to my aunt. It literally was a physical reaction to things that had happened in the past. And so again, I said, well, no, COVID is still around, because I was so scared and had all of these physical reactions to the trauma from the past that I couldn't say what I wanted to say. So that part, and then having him die 2 weeks later, it was so hard because could I have said something differently? Of course I could have said something differently. Would it have made a difference? Probably not. Should I keep replaying that in my head? No, it's not going to help anything. But it did at the beginning. It kept replaying, what should I have done? I wish I could have. I should have. So it was a lot. And yeah, it wasn't until this year that I could actually, when I would talk to my therapist and she would say, well, most people, when something traumatic happens, your reaction is, yes, this is awful. I'm having these reactions at this time. And then they can move on and they don't keep having the reactions years later. Whereas, 15 years later, I'm still reacting the same way I was before because I couldn't ever work through it. And the trauma just sat there in my brain and just, reacted whenever. So it wasn't until I had talked to her about it that I went, oh, that's what was happening. It was more than just, I don't want to leave my aunt to deal with it, because I felt inside of me scared to death.
Yeah, and that is legit. Like that is a post-traumatic expression. That is it's real. And what's really unfortunate is, especially those of us who do struggle with depression and anxiety, those things get stuck so tightly. Sometimes they wet themselves into part of our brains, and we're just like, I can't let it go. We just become obsessive about it. So, if you can go into it now, though, you see, okay, I can offer up this piece of advice to somebody that says, hey, yes. And you're, not as their therapist, but as a friend who has been there, someone who has walked the journey, to say, can I just encourage you that boundaries are not selfish? And so to say, this is where I draw the line, this is where I need you to stay, you're doing both of you a favor. It's actually very generous to say, we can have up to this much contact. And if it's a no contact boundary, then by all means, you have to stick to that and enforce that. But to set up boundaries is probably one of the most loving things, because then it allows, or could allow, the person on the other side, we don't know, like you said, you can't go back and second guess, because hindsight is always going to be 20/20, if not better sometimes. But if on this front end of things, be like, this could be the change, the catalyst they need to make a change, to say, oh, well, I want to cross that boundary, but I have to do X, Y, and Z in order to make that happen. And so, you can offer that up in the future based on something that you've experienced. And I think that's very healthy, to be able to use past experiences to help yourself, but also with your books. I mean, you're clearly offering a message of hope and help to others who might be facing the same thing.
Yeah. So I had said it before, the first draft can often be very angry. Goodbye Too Soon, the first draft was all anger, I would say. Like, I was so mad at Brandon for deciding to choose drugs over his family. even though I know from going to school, from going to therapy, I even did my co-op at a drug and alcohol recovery house. So I know educationally that is not the case. But emotionally, that was exactly how I was feeling. So when I went back through the second draft, I was like, okay, so we got to make this not about how mad I am that he chose something that he never chose, but about providing information to the reader that addiction is a mental health condition. There are certain risk factors associated with it. And when we are family of people who have addiction, that it's okay that we need to set boundaries. It's okay that we have this array of emotions about them. And just kind of viewing things from a different way. So the biggest themes in there, was boundaries and forgiveness. Forgiving the person because they are not choosing. My brother never decided, he never woke up one day and went, that'll be a good idea. If I never talked to my family again or saw my kids, if I lost my job, I just got high all day. That seems like a great idea. That's not what happened. He didn't just wake up and decide that every single day for the last 20 years of his life. So forgiving him and having a little bit more understanding and compassion for him, and then forgiving myself for those last few conversations that I had with him, and forgiving myself, especially there was a lot of, as a teenager, I should have known the things that I learned about in college. Well, how the heck would I have known those things? Because I was 14. I was not in college. I did not take psychology. I did not have my co-op yet. So, but again, it's that hindsight, like you said, and I could not have known those things then. But forgiving myself for not being able to have known them and being like, no, it's okay for what I did and how I treated him. Yes, I think that I wish I could have done a few things differently, knowing what I know now, but also realizing that I cannot have that wish to the point of making myself feel bad because I know that I can't have done those things before.
100%. Yes. There is a matter of guilt. I mean, it hits hard and it hits like a wave, like regularly sometimes, especially when we are dealing with our own mental health and that kind of thing. So yes, guilt is for real, but you have to understand guilt needs to be a tool to help us do better in the future, not something that's supposed to weigh us down and pull us down and drown us, because it absolutely can. And I love what you said. And this was the direction I was going to go next with, you're talking about how there's a stigma of addiction that says, it's a moral failure, like just based on a single choice. And that's not what it is. There are a lot of factors that play into addictions, and that's all kinds of addictions. That's, whether it's food or drugs or sex or, gambling, whatever addiction it is, there are a lot of factors that you don't just wake up and say, I'd like to be an addict today. That's not how that works. So in your book, I love that you provided an entire section on risk factors when it comes to, what are some risk factors that people might have and that kind of thing. So you've identified several, and if you're good to talk about something like that, how can families be aware? What are some things they should be aware of when looking at a potential addiction?
Yeah. So, and that's why I had to add that in, because there is so much stigma around it. And it's something that, when my mom was getting the death certificate, she did not want to read it because she did not want to see that he died by drug overdose. That was something that she did not want anybody to know. In fact, when I told her I was writing this book, at first she's like, oh my gosh. But then once it was written and I really explained to her what it was, that it was more like a celebration and information, because I do a whole chapter on some awesome memories that I have of my brother as well, because an addict is not who he was. It was a condition that he had. Actually, I've never said it that way before, but I like that.
That's good.
So now my mom is all for it. She tells everybody about the book. She spells it for me. It's great. But so some risk factors. Trauma is a really big one. So things that like bullying, and my brother was bullied relentlessly in school because he was the poor kid. And I don't know if that just rolled off of me or just my friends as being female just didn't care. but they cared a lot on him. So trauma, not having, and now this isn't a risk factor that I found through research. I can't remember the research that led me over to this one, but not having the proper role models. So I talk about this, especially like nowadays, with all the controversy around pronouns and stuff, and I'm not going to get into all that, but with all that controversy, not having a male role model was very difficult for Brandon. It definitely, to me, was a risk factor. I can't remember what list I put it under because I did talk about it. But all he had was female role models. And I think that's why, we're so different. The only male role models he had was his dad, who left him, not once, but twice. My dad, who was a big jerk. And then we have a couple uncles. One lives out in BC, so we never really saw him. The other one is here. He's an alcoholic. He's a nice guy. He's not, he doesn't get angry when he's drinking, which is a nice change from my stepdad, but he still drinks every single day. So my brother didn't have a good male role model, and so he also never had good relationship role models either, because my mom, my aunts that were the most involved in our life, none of them had a good relationship with a male, so he didn't learn how to do any of that. So that was a really big theme as well with a risk factor. Genetics play a role. If somebody else in the family already has an addiction, and it does not have to be the same one at all. If somebody could be addicted to shopping, and then you still end up with an addiction to drugs, because it's a brain chemistry. So that's a really big one. It's that heredity versus nature versus nurture. There we go. So trying to think now. Those were the big ones that really came off. There was like some subsections, I know, but those were like the really big topics.
Yes, and 100%. That is so true. And nature versus nurture, I mean, you've got it both there. If you're talking about, a lack of role models as well as genetics, like that's a double whammy. And people don't realize, because especially when it comes to having role models, you're like, well, I set a perfectly good example. No, you don't understand that there is a gender role model situation. Like you want to see the person that you could potentially be, right? Like that's what you look up, somebody to look up to. And it's like, well, if they're not there, then you are lacking in that department. And that is a huge thing. And I think when you see all of these key factors, it goes back to, well, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about, Uncle Bob's, drinking problem or whatever. We need to talk about it. You need to be aware of it, because there is this chance. And that is one of the things that, in our household, we don't bring alcohol into the picture, because we know that we have, there are genetics down my family line that it's like, yeah, I have tendencies that food, I can get real addicted to food. I have a very healthy relationship with food. And so I know that if I have that relationship with food, there's a chance it could stem into other things, whether it was, spending money or alcohol. And so we just don't bring it into the house. And so when you're aware of the factors, the risk factors, talk about them, make them aware, make everybody aware in your family, so that we can break those cycles, because that is so important.
Exactly. Yeah. So seeing my brother, I have never done drugs. Like I have drank. So it's not to say that I couldn't have went down that road, but I have never tried drugs, because I saw what happened with Brandon. And I mean, weed is legal now here, and I still am like, I can't trust myself. And I've been having a lot of back pain. I've been going to a pain clinic and stuff, and we got to a point that it was, okay, so we either need to burn the nerves, or the only medication left to try is an opioid. And I'm like, well, we're not doing that one. Nope. So I've been getting giant needles shoved in my back very, very painfully, simply to avoid that potential addiction that could happen, because I know that I know opioids in general are very addictive. It very much runs in the family, and it scares the poop out of me.
Oh, for sure. And being aware of that, like that's an emotional maturity that, more people should have to say, I've seen the results. I know what could happen. And don't think it wouldn't happen to me. It couldn't happen to me, because you don't know. You don't know. Your brother did not set out and say, this, I'm good. He just set out. He made a choice. He didn't say,
the other, sorry, it just popped in my head because you were saying that. The other really big risk factor that I talked about in the book was the dual diagnosis. If you have another underlying condition. So later I find out that my brother had anxiety. And he probably had some PTSD in there too that was just never diagnosed. But I know Brandon was on anxiety medication when he was a young adult. So having that, and it could just be, so on my channel, I've talked to some other people who, they started doing drugs or drinking to mask the other symptoms. So to deal with the anxiety, I'm going to do drugs because I don't feel the anxiety when I'm doing them. And I think that was a lot to do with for my brother anyways. But that was another really big one. If they already have another diagnosis of something.
Oh, for sure. That's huge, because what happens is, especially when it is things like anxiety, you have this sense of I'm not in control. And so when you can put something on top of it, you are now in control of it, even though you're not really in control of it. And so it is definitely a huge risk factor. And so let's encourage everyone to, seek a different kind of help, a more professional kind of help. Don't try to take matters into your own hands. It's okay to ask for help.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Remember how much I've said it helps me? It's real. It's real.
It's so real. And it does matter. Like, you go to a therapist and you don't have a connection. Okay, find somebody else. Don't just say that therapy doesn't work for you, because you have to be able to connect with somebody and trust them. And so don't go one time and be like, oh, that's not for me. No, you keep trying if you want help. That's the other thing, is they have to want help. You can't force the issue and be like, you're going to therapy. That's a good way to say, to make them push back and say, no, I'm not. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. They will shut down even harder.
So fast. Yes.
Yeah. But and that's why, again, I've been writing about these experiences. And so for Goodbye Too Soon, I was talking to somebody and they said, do you think that it would be a good idea if I just kind of gave this book to my friend because her family is going through something similar? And I was like, that is exactly why I wrote this book. So that you as the friend don't have to say, hey, I've never been there. Maybe I've researched it. Maybe you even, but you've never been there. But so you don't want to give advice. But hey, you know what? I've read this book. Maybe it's helpful. You might find a little nugget of hope in there. So here you go. So I said, that is exactly why I wrote this. So please, yes, share it with them. And if they only get through one or two chapters, maybe that's all they need at that time. It's a resource. It's something so you don't have to feel like you are completely defeated.
Yes. And that is being able to provide those resources. And that's something that I would encourage you. Like if anybody who has a story inside of them, they're like, I need to share this with somebody, but I don't know how, just start writing it down. Just start putting it on the page, and you will find the right people for that resource to hit. But if you don't share your story, then there's no way you can ever help somebody with it, whether you're telling it verbally or writing it down, but we all have a story. You need to share it. I think that's my personal opinion.
Exactly. And I totally agree. You never even have to publish it per se, but maybe you're just sharing it with somebody who you've met, and you're sharing it with them. And that's the only time you share, but it could make the world of difference to that person.
Absolutely. Or even like we've said, it can make a difference for yourself, because once you've written it down, you've made a difference for one person, and that might be you.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I never said the one person had to be inside of yourself. It could be for yourself.
That's right. I love it. It's a great way to think about it. Okay. So we are starting to reach the end of our time. So let's open up the floor. You choose the topic.
Oh my goodness. So what we've already talked about is normally what I talk about.
Flip the script.
Flip the script. Oh my goodness. So I'm gonna say let's flip it. I'm gonna do some shameless self promotion here. So obviously we've talked a lot about the one book that I've written by Too Soon. I've written a few different nonfictions, and some kids books. So I just recently. So I don't promote my kids books as much as I should, because what I use, and it fits totally what we've been talking about. I use my kids books as kind of a de-stress coping in between those really hard books that I do. So my main focus has always been to advocate for more awareness and more openness around mental health. But it is really hard to write. So whenever I write one of those hard books, I write 2 or 3 kids books in between. So I just want to share my shameless self-promotion for my kids book that I did. It's called Neo's Forever Home. And it's actually that book there behind me. It's about my 3-legged kitty. So it's still kind of nonfiction, but it all rhymes. And so Neo, actually, what happened is there's this cat adoption place in our local mall. My husband and we went there, and we're looking at the cats, and the sign said, the cat had 3 legs. I was like, oh. And so we're looking, and he's adorable. And there was some other people there, and they were teasing him. Right? My husband looks at me, and so because we've got disabilities in the family, my husband looks at me and he goes, "The disabled kitty's coming home with us." There was no discussion, just that's what's happening. So I was like, well, yeah, they're beating him, of course. Like, we were totally on the same page right from the get-go. So Neo comes home with us, and so yeah, he's missing his arm. And what happened? He was born missing a bone. So we're supposed to have 2 bones in our forearm, and he was missing one of them. And so when the Humane Society found him, they did an X-ray, found that out, and they actually did a news article. I actually went and searched online. They did this whole little video clip before we had adopted him, so other people could know about him. And so yeah, they amputated his arm so that he wouldn't have more issues down the road from having that bad arm. And he is just the sweetest cat ever. He is so lovely. It does not slow him down. The only thing that he doesn't do the same as the other cats is he can't quite jump as high. But that's about it. He can still play. Like, he still bats toys around, which is, I will say, and not in a mean way, but it is a little bit funny because the arm that he's missing is a foot arm. So when he's batting the toy around, he has to like balance, and he kind of hits it, and he has to keep balancing. And then like when you're petting him and he gets really, really into it, and he moves, he loses his balance because he doesn't have the 2 arms. So yeah, I thought, it still fits into what we've been talking about, because it was, he was being picked on. And animals are such good coping strategies all on their own. And I could talk about kitties all day long.
Hey, I'm here for it. We're animal people. We love our animals around here.
Yeah. I think I said earlier, I got 4 cats and 3 dogs. And actually one of our dogs is a service animal. So Freddie, he's 11 years old now. So he's like, I'm done working, guys. I'm just old man now. But he's actually my kid's service dog. So my kid has autism. And when he was 9, we started this journey of trying to get a service dog for him. It is quite the journey. So we opted for buying one because the wait list was going to be too long. We didn't have that kind of money. So we fundraised. Oh my god. My husband's like, how are we going to get the money? I'm like, I'm going to fundraise for it. He goes, yo, okay. And I did. I worked very hard. I went to vendor shows. I talked to so many people. We had some other people that did their own vendor shows and donated the money back to us. The biggest one, there was this golf tournament that they did. They do one every year. And so they donated it to us that year because they had autism in their family. So it was just like, once you start talking about it, just like what we're doing now, once you start talking about these things that don't get talked about, amazing things happen.
Yes.
So then we get Freddie, and I absolutely adore Freddie. He had to go back for some boot camp training. And then when we're up there to get him, the lady that's training him introduces us to Daphne. Daphne is this little beagle. people kept returning her. And so she brought her in, and she's like smaller than your average beagle. And she puts her on my lap, and she's like shaking, petrified. And my husband's like, "Okay, we'll take that kid. We'll take that puppy too." Because Daphne and Freddie were like super close friends when they were up there. Because she had been returned, I think it was like 3 times already. Because beagles, they bark, their claws. Like, so she wasn't a service dog. She was just being like an emotional support, which is 2 different things. Mm-hmm. And so she like absolutely loved Freddie. So even when we brought her home, they each had their own crate. She would never go in her own crate, but she had no problem going in Freddie's. And Freddie's like, "Okay, I'm sleeping with you." So now they both sleep on my bed. But and then last year we got Zen. So because Freddie is old, we're like, "Hey, we need to get another dog and start training." So we got Zen, who was actually born on Lev's birthday. Right? I was like, "Hey, we have to get this puppy." We got him. He's from out west, actually. So Freddie and Daphne, even though we did buy them off of a trainer, they are still rescue dogs. I always like to say that because I'm a big proponent of rescue animals. They're the Americans in our house. But yeah, so Zen came. Zen's mom came over. She was pregnant puppy, and then she had Zen when they got here, and he was the only one from that litter, which is very surprising for a puppy. Born on my kid's birthday. I'm like, "Okay, we have to have him," and we get this little fluff ball. He is now the biggest dog. He is probably almost 100 pounds now. He's giant, and he's still only 1 year old. Well, he's almost 2. He's almost 2, but he's just this big, lovey baby, and I'm just like, "Oh my goodness, I love you all so much."
I love that. That's awesome.
We talked about such hard stuff. We got to talk about fun.
Yeah, no, I'm all for it. We have 3 goats, 3 dogs, and about 20 chickens, and so yeah, we love our animals around here. And 2 of our dogs are rescue dogs, and one of them, she is practically deaf and going blind in one eye, it looks like, and so I know, but she thinks she's a lap dog, and she's not. She's about 85 pounds, and she's a massive little.
Yeah, exactly. Zen thinks he's a lap dog, and I'm like, "I love you, but you're heavy."
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh! But so with your kids' books, like, what topics do you address? Do you address your kitty's 3 legs? Is that what the story is about? Is it about him being special, or?
So it's a very simple book for like the really little kids, and it really is just so he goes to the pound, and they're like, "What's wrong?" They take him to the vet. The vet, we don't go into the whole science of him not missing a bone, but the vet goes, "Well, this is going to help him." And so they take his arm off, and then he goes back, and it shows Neo being very sad because all of his kitty friends are going home. Then it shows the people making fun of him, and then it's funny. So my husband is bald, so I showed my husband the picture of him and I. It's all cartoons, and my husband goes, "Oh, great, a bald guy with a giant bow." I'm like, "What? It looks exactly like you in cartoon form. It's perfect." So it shows us saying, "Yeah, we're gonna take this kitty home," and then it shows Neo and like a cat carrier going, "Oh," like being scared, and then him being picked up and going, "Oh, this is good," and then going home, and then there's a big smile on him. He has his home that he's going to be loved in. So, it's because it's for kids. Kids don't need all that nitty gritty stuff that we talk about as adults because we can process more information. But just the idea of he's being teased, but he can find a home where they're going to love him. That's the really big key.
I love that. Kids books can play such a large role in kids' emotional and mental well-being. And so when I come across really good kids books for those purposes, I'm always like, let me add that to the list, because kids books are, they can be entertaining, but I prefer the ones that are entertaining and have a message of positivity like that. So
yeah,
I'm really glad that you brought those up. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I have a couple other kids books, but the other one that has like the good messages in it is, so it's called Woofy. Woofy is supposed to be a series. The second one is written. My kid is drawing the pictures and taking almost 2 years. But so the first Whoopi, it's called Whoopi Goes to the Hospital. It's actually my aunt actually wrote the original draft of this back in the 90s for my cousin's class. So my aunt found it in her basement when she was cleaning, and I was like, turn that into a story. So I cleaned it up because I love her, but she's not a writer. So I cleaned it up, made it kind of flow a little bit better. My kid did the pictures because he actually had an art class for school, so he had to draw some pictures. Perfect. So he did the pictures for that, and so Whoopi goes with this kid to the hospital to help him be very brave. So that's the theme of all the Whoopi books. So the next one that has been written and is still waiting for I think there's only 3 pictures left. Honestly, my kid drives me crazy. I love him, but he drives me crazy. Because the problem is that once the character is drawn, now it has to be the same artist for all of them.
Right.
So you might see over the years, I'm going to repeat some of the pictures. I told him, I'm like, just do it. Do me like an emotional array of Whoopi and I'll just grab what I need. But he hasn't yet. But anyway, so this one, so my kid actually, he had a hamster that died. So my aunt wrote, so it's a very family project. My aunt writes the first draft. I clean it up. My kid does the pictures for them. So, it's about Whoopi going home with this little girl who's all excited to meet all her animals. And then a few days later, the hamster dies. And so she's very sad. So again, Whoopi just helps her be a little bit brave to say goodbye to the hamster.
I love it. Oh, that's great. Yeah, my kid is also an artist, and she does a lot of, I'm like, hey, kid, can you do me, I need a logo, or I need this, that, or the other. But oh my gosh, the time that it takes, she will whip out one of her own characters in no time flat, and I'm like, excuse me, I asked first.
Well, and my kid makes me pay him. Not. So it's like, okay, if I'm paying you for this, timely manner here.
That's right. And so, yes.
The third book my aunt's already written out the third book. I haven't read it yet because I don't want to get so far ahead of myself, but the third one's already first drafted. It's going to be about the tooth fairy.
Nice. Yeah, we're going to have to start drawing up contracts and be like, you know what? If you want paid for this work, then it's going to be done by this point.
Exactly. Right. I figured. And he even had co-op last year in school. I said, okay, you know what? Co-op for me because you are working for me. You're doing a bunch of different things. So I figured by doing that, he'd have the whole book done in the semester. Oh, no.
One day.
Well, when his teacher would call me, because I'm the supervisor, would call me and say, what mark do you think? I'm like a 75. Like, because his time management really sucks.
Hey, that is a skill that it's got to be taught, and sometimes you got to learn it the hard way.
Exactly. Just because you're co-oping for mom doesn't mean I'm not going to be honest. You're not getting 100.
Oh, that's good momming right there.
Yeah, I thought so.
I love it. Oh my gosh. All right. Randi Lee, how can listeners connect with you and your work?
So you can buy all of my books on Amazon. Everything's there. As well, you can find me. My website is rbwriting.ca. All of my so I have my own podcast, which we didn't really talk about, but that's okay. So all of those are on writerdieShow.ca. So on YouTube, you can find me at RB Media. Or if you search Write or Die Show, that'll pop up too, because that one has the most episodes. Facebook, I am on RB Writing and RB Media. Instagram and TikTok, it's just my name, Randi Lee Bowlaugh. And because of the topic of animals, my animals have their own TikTok. Yes. So they are at 4 cats, 3 dogs. They have way more followers than me because they're adorable. But at 4 cats, 3 dogs for them. And then you can see a 3-legged kitty. And on Spotify, RB Media. And probably Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen.
Okay. And what is your podcast? What does that look like? What is that about?
So I actually have a couple. So the Write or Die Show, which is the first one that I started. I say I'm building a media empire. So the first one that I started is called the Write or Die Show. So write like you're writing something. And I interview other authors and we talk about mental health from a personal perspective. And then I have another one called Reader's Intrigue. Authors read the first chapter of their book. So I very hands off of that one. I do a little bit of editing, but that's about it. So that, because you never know if you're going to like a book just by the back cover, right?
That's true.
First chapter. Let's meet the author. Plus, I don't think indie books get enough love. So they're pretty much all indie authors, which I love. The other show, it's called Our Neurodiverse World. And so I talk to whomever. This time you don't have to be a writer at all, but we talk about neurodiversity. So autism, ADHD, learning disabilities. I've had traumatic brain injuries. So lots of different people on that one. I also have a show. It's only in podcast style. So it's called What I'm Reading. And it's book reviews. So I have a blog on my website of book reviews. And I went, well, if I'm already writing them, I could just put them too for people who don't want to read it, but you can. So that's just called What I'm Reading. So wherever you listen to podcasts. So that's what I've got going on right now in the world of podcasts. But I've got some big plans for the new year. I've been designing on a magazine, which I've come up with a name. It's going to be called Something Divergent. And then I've also got another show in the works. We haven't quite picked the name of the show, but it's going to be watching me do some art. So I'm wood burning while talking about history of mental health.
Oh my goodness. Do you sleep? Just out of curiosity.
Sometimes.
I'm just wondering, because I'm like exhausted listening. I'm looking at my calendar going, I do half of that and I feel dead.
And this is why we don't compare ourselves.
That's exactly right. Because, I don't know what your other obligations are, but I'm just going, I'm exhausted. But I also like talking to people exhausts me. And so why I chose this element of work, I don't know. But I did. And I love it. I love connecting with people. But after this, I'm going to go sit for an hour in quiet.
It's true. Like, even when I do my show, especially we talked about a really heavy topic.
Yeah.
So that's also exhausting. So when I do the Write or Die show, it's a little bit lengthy like this one. The neurodiverse world, we can usually keep it to a shorter time frame, so it's not quite as exhausting. But honestly, yeah.
Wait a minute. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So what is one piece of advice or encouragement that if listeners hear nothing else, what do you want them to walk away with today?
Don't lie when somebody asks you how you're doing.
Yes.
We can start with the truth there. I think we can roll that into other things.
I love it. And I will offer up, and don't ask if you don't really want to know.
I figured that was like 2 pieces of advice, so I'm glad we both did it.
Yes. Like I get it. Like it is so easy to just brush it off and be like, how you doing? It's like, you don't know what that person's going through. So either really care or don't ask.
Exactly. And if you're being asked, be honest. You don't have to go in depth, especially if it's a stranger. Honest, have a nice day. Have a great day.
Yes. And if they ask follow-up questions, you choose whether or not to answer. I love it. Like, we have come full circle. And that is, like, I think the perfect advice, because it's something that we take for granted. We do. We're just like
100%. 100%.
Oh my gosh. Well, Randi Lee, thank you so much for being here and for taking this time and just sharing your story. Like, I know that it's not an easy story to share, but it is a story that's going to mean something to so many people when they hear it. So thank you for being here and sharing.
And that's just like Cliff Notes.
Right. So, if you want to talk to her more in depth, then, you can read her book, and she will have told you the whole story.
Right. Pretty much.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and that everything in the future, I know that you are making a difference. And so I can't wait to see what happens next.
Thank you.